Tonight, we've got a sweet collection of calming bedtime stories to help kids sleep. Let's get cozy and drift off together. Before we do, could you please tap subscribe? By doing this small thing, you'll let YouTube know you love what we do. Let's get ourselves cozy, snuggle down, and I'll begin. The Mountain Race by Luke Prendergast. One afternoon when the sky was grey and the rain was falling in a pitter-pattering drumroll on the street outside, Maggie and her friend Thomas were sitting on the sofa playing on a video game. The game they were playing was a racing game called Carcraft. In it, you mined and foraged for resources to build your own personalised cars with all of the gadgets and colours and accessories you could want. And then you raced them. Carcraft was Thomas's favourite game. Maggie liked it well enough too, but not as much as she liked other things like doing magic tricks, exploring the great outdoors, and going on wonder-filled adventures in her Imaginarium. But Thomas was fascinated by all things technological, computers and cars and, yes, video games. And Maggie had to admit that when it was rainy outdoors and there wasn't much else they could do, a game of Carcraft with Thomas was pretty fun. And she was getting better at it too. When Thomas had first shown her the game, he won every single race. But now Maggie could keep up with him. That afternoon alone, she had even beaten him twice. Whenever she won, her best pal and magician's assistant, the White Rabbit Marshmallow, who crouched on the floor quite contentedly nibbling on a leaf of cabbage, would thump his foot on the floor in applause, and Thomas would say, "Nice one, Maggie." They were in the middle of one race in which they were speeding down a road that ran alongside a sandy beach and an ocean of curling blue waves, when Maggie had an idea so surprising that she completely forgot she was playing the game, and her racing car drifted right off the road and came to a halt in a cloud of sand. "Everything okay, Maggie?" Thomas asked, pausing the game. "You almost drove straight into the sea." But when he turned to look at her, he recognised the look on her face very well indeed. "Yikes," he said. "You've had an idea, haven't you?" Maggie nodded. "I sure have," she said. And then she proceeded to tell Thomas that the idea had just popped into her head that instead of playing Carcraft on the games console, they could find a way, what with Thomas's technical wizardry, of creating the world of Carcraft in Maggie's Imaginarium and getting to play it for real. Or, she finished breathlessly, not for real, but like real in our imaginations. Maggie's Imaginarium was a tent that she'd set up in her back garden. But it was no ordinary tent. It was an enchanted tent which could take you on wondrous adventures through your own mind. If you lay on your back on the floor of the tent, the canvas ceiling transformed into a brilliant and breathtaking projection of your own imagination, which you could ride through just as though you were riding on a magic carpet. Maggie had taken Thomas on a trip through his imagination a number of times, and it was only a couple of months ago that Thomas had made his own contribution to the Imaginarium. Being the science whiz that he was, he had invented a special gizmo that allowed him and Maggie not only to spectate their imagination, but to literally step inside it. And now Maggie was wondering if Thomas's gizmo could let them play Carcraft for real. Thomas was pinching his chin between his thumb and forefinger, which was something he did when he was thinking hard. "Maggie," he said in a quiet voice, "that is a genius idea. I can't believe I didn't think of it myself." Then Thomas leapt up and went to the corner of the room where his computer was sitting on the desk. He turned it on, then began tapping on the keys so that lines and lines of complicated computer code started running across the screen in a bright white font. Maggie, who was looking over his shoulder, couldn't make heads or tails of it. She might be the greatest magician in town, maybe even in the country. But when it came to computers, she didn't even know where to begin. "What are you doing, Thomas?" she asked. He explained that he was just making some adjustments to the software of the gizmo. Maggie's idea was unbelievably cool, but it would take a few fixes and a lot more power to get the gizmo to make it feel like they were really in the game. So Maggie watched as Thomas typed for a few more minutes. Then he clicked a button, and out of his computer popped the gizmo, which he slipped into his pocket. "Let's hope it works," he said. They told Thomas's mum that they were walking to Maggie's house, which was just a street over. "In this rain?" Thomas's mum said, and insisted that they wrap up properly in their anoraks. Then they set off, with Marshmallow keeping dry beneath Maggie's raincoat. When they reached Maggie's house, they called out, "Hello," to her parents, before running out into the back garden, through the falling rain, and into the shelter of the Imaginarium. Inside was that old familiar smell Maggie had come to love. Damp cloth, warm air, the promise of wonder. Thomas attached the newfangled gizmo to the side of the Imaginarium, while Maggie and Marshmallow took up their places on the floor, staring up at the dark ceiling. When he came to join them, Thomas shifted himself until he was comfortable and said, "Okay, Maggie, off we go. Ready when you are." "Oh no," Maggie said with a little chuckle. "It's not going to be my imagination this time. It's got to be yours." Thomas turned his neck to glance at her, blinking nervously. "What do you mean?" he asked. "You're the magician, the one with the big, magical imagination. Only you can hold together a world as big as Carcraft." "Oh no," Maggie said again, smiling gently at him still. "No one knows the world of Carcraft better than you, Thomas. It's your favourite game." "Nope," she insisted. "This time, it's got to be you. You just have to let your mind relax, and then let your imagination fill up with everything you've ever known and experienced about Carcraft. And anything you're not sure of, just make it up. It is your imagination after all. And don't worry," she added, because she could tell from the look in his eyes that he was still a bit nervous. "I'll be right here next to you all along. I'll guide you through it." "Okay," Thomas sighed. "I'll do my best." "Oh, one more thing," Maggie said. "Try to make it sunny. I'm bored with all this rain." And so, with a deep breath, Thomas did as she said. He closed his eyes, he relaxed his mind, and then he let his imagination fill up with the world of Carcraft. He tried his best not to force it. He didn't grope through his memories of the game, grabbing them and snatching them and stuffing them into his imagination the way he often stuffed his school books into his overfilled bag. He just let his imagination, as if by its own accord, fill up with the world of Carcraft. "That's it, Thomas," Maggie's voice said from somewhere beside him, and he knew it was working. "Okay," she said. "Here we go." The black ceiling of the Imaginarium lit up with bright stars. Then the stars rained down upon them, or maybe they rained up towards them. They were twisting and floating, body and soul, through the expanses of Thomas's imagination, until, at last, they landed with a gentle thump by the side of a road. It was a road that Maggie recognized. It looked just like the road beside the car workshop in Carcraft. Yes, there was the workshop itself, a big building of corrugated iron, with a big sign painted in orange letters outside it. And there were the palm trees, blowing in gentle breeze, the bright sunlight shining through their leaves. The road snaked off into the distance, where a tall mountain loomed out of the landscape. And here, striding out of the workshop, was the car mechanic, Vulcan, a green-haired grizzly bear in work overalls. It was just like in the video game. Thomas really had created the world of Carcraft. "Howdy," said Vulcan, holding out a paw to help them to their feet. You folks ready to build yourselves some cars?" Maggie and Thomas exchanged looks of excitement. "We sure are," they said. "And you guys know what you're doing? First off, you need to head out to collect raw materials. Then you bring 'em back here to the warehouse, and I'll help you knock 'em together to build your very own road racer. Then you race to the top of that mountain." Maggie and Thomas didn't need telling twice. They went out into the forest behind them, searching for resources. Maggie spotted some first, some scrap metal that would be perfect for building the body of her car. She reached for it, and as she touched it, just like it did in the video game, the metal disappeared and tucked itself invisibly into her bag. She couldn't see it, and it didn't weigh a thing, but she knew she had it there in her inventory. "That's so neat, Thomas," she said. Next up, Thomas found some cans of paint, which he put in his inventory. Then he climbed a tree to get some wicked-looking wings that had got stuck in a high branch, while Maggie used a shovel to dig underground. There she found a pile of glistening diamonds, which she knew would be brilliant for decorating her car. While they were on their search, they found a couple of power-ups too. Thomas found a pair of wings that would let his car fly for a minute or so, and Maggie found a vial of bright blue liquid with some strange markings on the front. Neither she nor Thomas had ever seen it before in Carcraft. "That means it must be from your imagination," Maggie told him. "But then why don't I know what it is?" Thomas asked, scratching his head in confusion. "The imagination is a mysterious thing," said Maggie wisely. "The imagination can know things and invent things without us even knowing about it." Soon, when they'd collected all their resources, they'd return to the car warehouse to show Vulcan what they'd found. Vulcan picked through it, growling appreciatively every now and then as he turned over their resources, their wheels and metal scraps and odd machine parts. "Good," he said finally. "Nice haul. These will make 2 pretty sharp cars." Vulcan slipped on his clear face mask and gave Maggie and Thomas some protective clothing too. Then they set to work constructing their cars. They sawed and welded metal pieces together. They fixed axles onto wheels. They pumped tires. And they handed Vulcan spanners and hammers, which he used to clunk noisily about with the engines. Carefully, they fitted panels of glass for windscreens and windows. Thomas had made a sleek car, which sat low to the ground so that it could be extra aerodynamic. He painted it bright green with racing stripes, and to the sides he attached his special power-up wings. Maggie's car was bigger, stronger looking, a truck made for tolerating off-road conditions. It had big tires and a cab that was held high off the ground. She painted it yellow and covered it with the diamonds she found. Finally, she asked Vulcan what the vial of bright blue liquid was. "Ho, now, that's a pretty rare power-up," Vulcan told her. "It's called slow-mo potion. If you break the vial and release the liquid, the whole race will go in slow motion. It's a whole new level of experience, fun and relaxing, all at the same time." Maggie stowed the slow-mo potion in her pocket. She'd decide if she wanted to use it later. When their cars were finally crafted, Maggie and Thomas drove them out to the road where they lined them up on the starting line. They felt little bubbles of excitement going through them because this was the first time they'd ever been in the driver's seat. They were far too young to drive in the real world, of course, but it was great fun to experience it in their imaginations. "All right," said Vulcan, raising a black and white checked flag. "Your destination is that mountain peak. On the count of 3. 3, 2. Neither Maggie nor Thomas could help it. They stepped on the accelerator before Vulcan even had a chance to call 1. Off they rolled down the road, Thomas moving sleekly through the air, Maggie chugging along in her monster truck. The air rushed through their hair, and Marshmallow, who sat beside Maggie in her truck, had to flatten his long white ears along his back so they didn't flap about in the wind. The palm trees rolled past them, as did buildings and houses with creatures looking out of their windows at them as they went. And then they were out of the town, travelling down a dirt track towards the mountain peak, which was getting bigger and bigger by the minute. Maggie's truck fared better on the dirt track. Thomas's car, speedy as it was, bumped along behind her. "Well," Thomas thought, "now's the perfect time to use my power-up." He pressed a button on his dashboard, and the wings attached to the side of his car began to extend. Then they let out one flap and another flap until he felt himself lifting up off the ground. Maybe, he thought as he rose upwards, his car was better suited to the air than the earth. It swooped and plunged, light as a feather, and in a few moments it had sailed right over and in front of Maggie's truck. "Cool moves," cried Maggie, trundling along behind him. When Thomas landed again, he was some distance ahead of Maggie, and now they had reached the foot of the mountain. But Maggie had a secret power-up up her sleeve too. She slipped the vial out of her pocket, and with her teeth she pulled out the cork, releasing the bright blue liquid into the air. That's when the strangest sensation set in. They were still driving, pressing their feet on the accelerators, moving up the track that snaked its way up the side of the mountain, between boulders and big leafy trees. But they were moving. Well, they were moving incredibly slowly. "Maggie!" Thomas called up ahead. His voice stretched out into slow motion. "You used the vial." Maggie laughed, but her laughter came out in long, drawn-out ha-has. Vulcan was right. The experience of driving in slow motion was at once great fun and surprisingly relaxing. The leaves on the trees seemed to ripple in a gentle wind, Each bounce on the road was slow, a lift and fall, as though they were jumping on the moon. When Marshmallow shook his head, Maggie could see each individual hair flap one way and then the other. And very gradually, in slow motion, Maggie was catching up on Thomas. As they climbed the long, curving mountain road, heading slowly, ever so slowly, towards the peak, the distance between them narrowed and narrowed, until finally, when they were nearly at the top, they were driving right next to each other. In slow motion, Thomas turned towards her and waved through the window. She wondered if she looked just as funny as he did, waving in slow motion. And that was how they finished the race, rolling inch by inch, slow as snails, over the finish line at exactly the same time. As they crossed the line, the effects of the blue liquid power-up cleared up, and they found themselves moving at their normal speed again. They tumbled out of their cars, clutching their bellies with laughter. What fun the slow-motion potion was, they agreed. They'd never felt a sensation like it, as though the link between their brains and their bodies had loosened a little bit, and you watched your arms and legs moving ever so slowly, as though they weren't necessarily your own. And the race was a draw, Thomas said. We got to the mountain peak at exactly the same time. I like that, said Maggie. It's nice to end a day of racing on a draw. She sat down on the floor at the peak of the mountain and looked out at the view below. The whole world of Carcraft spread out before them. The little towns, the teeming roads, the trees and valleys, the racetracks. It was, Maggie thought, infinitely more rich and detailed than anything she'd seen on the video game. Thomas took a seat next to her on the ground, with Marshmallow nestled in between them. Maggie asked him how the Carcraft world of the Imaginarium compared to what they played in his living room. Oh, Thomas said, playing it on the screen is one thing, but living it for real? That's another thing. Well, said Maggie, not for real, in our imaginations. Just because it's in our imaginations, Thomas told her with a wise little smile, that doesn't mean it's not real. Maggie gave out a little chuckle. That's exactly the kind of thing she usually told him, she thought. I'd like to stay here for a little while, said Thomas, before we head back out to the Imaginarium. Me too, Maggie said. It's pretty amazing what you've made out of your imagination. And what's more, it's not raining. And so Maggie and Thomas and Marshmallow stayed on top of the mountain peak, above the beautiful, busy world of Carcraft. They watched as cars as small as insects meandered around roads. They watched as the huge grassy plains turned from green to pink to red as the suns sunk down through the sky. When at last they grew tired and began to yawn, they knew it was time to head back home. They'd spent enough time in the Imaginarium. They were ready to get into their PJs, drink a cup of warm cocoa, and climb into their beds. And so, With one last look around the marvellous world of Carcraft, the three friends closed their eyes and went back home. This is The Owl That Yawned Till Dawn by Jane Thomas. Barnabas Carruthers Wingaloft III is a very small owl with a very big name. It's a bit of a mouthful, to be honest, so we'll call him the name all his friends use, and that's Sparky. He's little more than a tiny bundle of golden fluff and feathers that stick out at funny angles from his head and his wings and his soft downy belly, which is why he got the name Sparky. That, and because he's so very, very, very lively. Sparky is interested in 1,000 different things. This little owl likes football and basketball as much as he likes ping pong and pogo sticks. He likes fishing and singing, walking and talking, flying and floating and dancing and boating. He loves all this so much, however, that there's a problem. Sparky never sleeps. As I'm sure you know, owls generally sleep through the day and come out at night. Nighttime is usually the time they love the most, soaring through dark skies, following the lights of twinkling stars, white wings spread wide across inky black backdrops. You may be very lucky and see an owl in the early light of dawn sometimes, when they're heading home from whatever adventures they've just been on. Perhaps you've heard them just as the sky starts to get dark, when the sun sinks over the horizon, an echoing hoot that travels through the trees and out into the open, letting the others know they're awake, they're up, and they're heading out. Sparky loves the night. He and his closest owl friends play flying games, racing from the great oak across to the mighty pine, dashing past branches with barely a feather's breadth between wings and wood. And then there are his bat friends, the squeaking gossips of the night sky, who chitter-chatter from dusk till dawn and can flash through the night faster than a will-o'-the-wisp. Moths are always up for races too. And although they're small, they have the advantage that they can fit into teeny tiny spaces and take sneaky shortcuts through the trees. The thing is, Sparky also loves the day. The colours are so much brighter. He can see for miles and miles, and you can't see rainbows at night. If Sparky slept all day, he would have no idea that rainbows existed. And being a little blob of gold himself, he loves hanging out at the end of them. During the day, Sparky gets to spend his time with a load of different creatures, and some of his best friends are cats and dogs, who get to tell him all about the insides of homes where they live. He's all sorts of fascinated by houses and cottages and high-rises and garden sheds, anywhere really that people like to sleep. He flew into a house once and was so giddy with excitement he raced into the back of a wardrobe. The door closed behind him, and he accidentally spent an entire night in there. It's hard to know who was more surprised, the little old lady who opened the wardrobe door who let him out, or his mother when he finally made it back home. He promised his mother he would never disappear like that again, and has stuck to his word, getting stories of these inner worlds from the cats who hang out beneath lavender bushes, and the dogs who lounge about on tartan rugs in the sunshine. At this point, Sparky has given up on sleep entirely. It means he yawns an awful lot, but it also means he doesn't have to miss out on a single thing. "Little Sparky," asks his grandmother with a smile, Why don't you want to go to sleep? I don't want to miss a single thing, says Sparky. Dear Sparky, asks his auntie, taking him under her wing, why don't you want to go to sleep? I have too much energy. I don't want to be still, says Sparky. Darling Sparky, says his mother, polishing Sparky's beak before bed. Why don't you want to go to sleep? There's too much world to see, says Sparky. The three owls sigh as they watch Sparky head out into the early light of dawn. They gather some of the little owl's closest friends, and together they hatch a plan. They've watched Sparky yawn from night till morn. They've seen him yawn from dusk till dawn. And they've decided enough is enough. Sparky, who wants to know everything, must learn how wonderful sleep can be. He must be shown how peaceful it is to lie safely curled up in a warm and cosy bed, blanket pulled up to his beak and head resting on the softest of pillows. He must realize how amazing dreams can be, taking us to places on the other side of the world in the space of a few breaths. He will have more energy, says his grandmother wisely. He will feel happier, says his auntie assured. He will still be our Sparky, says his mother with a smile. Just a Sparky with a lot less yawn. You would think Sparky might have thought it strange what happened as he went about his day. The first friend he came across was a rabbit named Twitch, on account of her little pink nose, always twitching and sniffing the air. You never knew, after all, where someone might have hidden a carrot. Hey, Twitch, said Sparky. Do you want to play log balancing? Let's see who can stay on a log the longest. We could, answered Twitch. Or I could tell you about my dream last night. Twitch told Sparky all about how she had climbed into her bed and pulled her little blue blanket right up to her nose, how she had shuffled her head this way and that on the pillow, and put her ears in just the right places. Then, how she had drawn her legs up so she was curled up in a teeny tiny ball as she fell fast asleep. Her mother had sung her a lullaby, the way she always did, her gentle voice rising and falling in a soft lilt that told the tale of a rabbit long before, who had run through the fields by day and slept safe in his burrow at night. And then Twitch had disappeared into a dream, where she and her brothers had burrowed and burrowed, digging through soft soil and going deeper than they ever had dared before. The colour of the earth had changed, going from dark brown to the red of burnished copper, and then, all of a sudden, they had emerged into a field where the grass was dry, and the sky stretched above was the brightest blue, and in the distance there had been elephants and zebras, and a leopard lazing on a lilo, and a hippo twirling in a tutu. A giraffe in a scarf had strode slowly by, and the tiniest, blackest, shiniest, smartest dung beetle had rolled past with a perfect ball of dung being pushed by his hind legs. And Twitch had danced with flamingos who swooped and bowed and curtsied and swayed, 1,000 together in a lake that shimmered as if filled with diamonds and stars. And when Sparky had heard the dream, he couldn't believe that it was possible to disappear to such magical places while you were fast asleep. He had always longed to go to Africa and wondered however it might be possible, and here was the answer. He just had to fall asleep. But then he remembered the fun of standing on a log that bobbed and rolled as it rested in a lake, and he thought, well, it wasn't possible to do that and fall asleep, and maybe he should stay awake after all. Twitch's mother was calling her in for lunch, so Sparky went on his way. He flew across one of his favourite fields, the one dotted with sunflowers that turned their faces to the sky and basked in the warmth of the sun, and went to the village of Lower Botherington. His friend Hank lived there, a huge bull who lived in the back garden of an old man's cottage, and the pair enjoyed grumping about their day to each other. "Not enough mud," Hank would grumble, thrusting his hooves into barely squelching ground as if to prove his point. "Too much mud," the old man would mumble back, pointing out the line of black-brown footsteps that now led through his living room and straight to the bottoms of his welly-wearing feet. "Hey, Hank," called Sparky. "Care to race me across the field?" "Oh, I would. I absolutely would," said Hank. "But, you see, it's time for my afternoon nap. Nothing better than an afternoon nap, you know. I have the most wonderful dreams. Do you know what I dreamed about yesterday?" And Hank started to tell Sparky all about how he'd lain down in the shade of his favourite horse-chestnut tree. The grass had been just perfect. Not too wet and not too dry. Not too firm and not too soft. Exactly as he liked it. The sun rippled through the leaves of the tree, enough to keep him warm but not too warm, and the breeze rustled against the grass, enough to keep him cool but not too cool. Oh, and he had dreamed the most wonderful dream. A butterfly had landed right on the end of his nose, pink and golden wings opening and closing gently in time to his breathing. When he breathed in, the wings would open, and when he breathed out, the wings would close. Then the butterfly had taken flight, and Hank had followed as she led him to a silver stream where the water sparkled and sang as it rolled over the pebbles, and she had shown him a cave hidden behind a waterfall, and he had followed her inside. And there, inside, the walls were lit by fallen stars, their glow as golden as the sun, and a frog wearing a beret sat waiting on a log, a paintbrush held in his hand and a faraway look in his eyes. The butterfly led Hank to a clearing in the cave, where light shone down from an opening far above in the ground and lit him in a single beam of sunshine. Then 1,000 fireflies came and placed flowers on his horns and polished the ring he wore in his nose so it dazzled and danced. Then the frog had reached for his paints and stood before his easel, looking back and forth between the canvas and the bull, capturing the moment when Hank was perfectly lit and dressed with 1,000 flowers. And when the frog was finished and the canvas dried, the pink and golden butterfly led him to a cave that opened up as if it were a cathedral beneath the ground, and the painting was hung on a wall with the other masterpieces of the frog. A pea-green duck sailed a boat across the seas, and a snail slid on skis down the side of a snowdress mountain. Here, a chipmunk feasted on golden cherries and chocolate, and there, a caterpillar did cartwheels in a flowing silver dress. Sparky blinked a little as Hank finished his story, and thought, what a wonderful dream that must have been to disappear into. His feathers felt a little heavy, and he felt a yawn pressing against the inside of his beak, but he pushed aside the feeling, and instead waved goodbye to Hank and wished him sweet afternoon dreams. If Twitch didn't want to play with a log, and Hank didn't want to race across a field, perhaps his friend Fergus, the great ginger cat, would join him for an hour of tail chasing before the sun started to set. Sparky found Fergus curled up in the conservatory at the back of the cottage he shared with Mrs. Hazelberry. Theirs was the last of the homes in Lower Botherington, before you reached the lane that led to the sea, and Sparky and Fergus often walked together. Well, Fergus walked and Sparky flew down to the beach at this time of day. Tail chasing in the final hours of daylight was something they both loved to do, twirling round and round on the sand before falling with a splish and a splash into the emerald sea. "Hey, Fergus," called Sparky, knocking with his beak on the glass of the conservatory. "Fancy coming out for a bit of tail chasing?" The large ginger cat stretched and yawned. The sun had come at just the right angle onto the comfiest of the chairs, and he had been indulging in a little bonus catnap while Mrs. Hazelberry was off visiting her sister for the day. When she was home, there was so often something to disturb him. The clanging of pans in the kitchen, the rush of the washing machine, the hum of the hoover, and he liked to take advantage of every moment when she slipped away for a while. Of course, when she was home and it was evening, he would curl up on her knee, and together they would have a cheeky bit of bonus shut-eye. But during the day, it was a rare treat to squeeze in a sleep. "I'm sorry," said Fergus, swishing his tail by way of apology. "You know I would. I love a bit of tail chasing. But I've just emerged from the most wonderful dream, and I'm hoping I can slip back into it." And for the third time that day, Sparky found himself listening to the story of a dream. It didn't cross his mind at all that it was perhaps terribly strange that all his friends were telling him about their most wonderful dreams. Maybe because he was getting awfully wrapped up in the stories, and rather beginning to wonder if he could conjure up something as magical as them. Fergus explained that he had climbed onto the couch and settled his head against his favourite cushion, rolling onto his back and spreading his paws to take full advantage of the warmth of the late afternoon sun shining through the window. He had done his usual trick of counting imaginary stars to fall asleep, and was barely halfway round the outline of a weeping willow done in silver sparkles when he disappeared into a dream. The cat had found himself floating on a flying carpet, one so soft He sunk right into it as he watched the golden tassels flap and flail in the wind. Higher and higher he'd flown into the sky, drifting over trees and forests and far away to the mountains. The carpet had floated down until it landed on a bed of purple heather, and Fergus had stepped off and followed the lilting sound of a lute to the very top of the snow-capped mountain. And there, on a rock, green with moss and as soft as the snow, sat a llama with a little guitar, strumming a song he had learned 10,000 miles away. The llama hummed, a sweet melody lifting into the sky and taking flight with 100 bluebirds that rose on the notes of the song and spread it to all the corners of the land. And then he was back on the carpet and flying away from the mountain and heading over the sea. And he looked down to see a dozen dolphins dancing in the twilight, silver waves rushing over them. Whales wallowed in the waters, warmed by the rays of the sun, and seagulls spread their wings and soared, eyes closed, towards the distant horizon. And the skies turned pink as the sun started to sink lower and lower in the sky. On the backs of the seagulls were oysters, open to the air, and pearls shining and gleaming, polished to perfection. And the oysters rocked back on the feathers of the birds and felt the sun and saw the first stars appear in the sky overhead. As Fergus finished his story, Sparky found he could do nothing to stop his yawn. His beak stretched wide, and he rushed to cover it with his wing, just as his mother had taught him to do. And with his eyes closed, he missed seeing Fergus sneak a smile to himself. He missed that Hank was standing and looking over the garden wall, and he missed that Twitch was hiding in the rose bushes. He missed that his friends were all there, watching and waiting, seeing if they'd managed to work a little magic and convince Sparky that sleep was a wonderful thing. Because much as the real world is full of marvels, there is magic buried in our imagination that only comes out in dreams. Sparky was a very sleepy owl as he flew back to his bed that night. His mother and auntie and grandmother had all stayed awake during the day, hoping against hope that he would return home ready to slip into his bed and disappear into a dream. On this night, they hoped, the tiny owl would not yawn until dawn, but instead would snuffle and sniffle and rustle and smile as he slept the sleep of 1,000 nights. It was a very sleepy Sparky who returned to the nest, and he didn't argue as his mother helped him polish his beak before bed. And he didn't argue when his grandmother pulled on his bright red bed socks and his long, woolly nightcap. And he didn't argue when his auntie said she would sit by his side and sing him a lullaby. "Yes," he mumbled, "Twitch's mother sings lullabies to her. I think I'd like that." The 3 owls gathered around Sparky and tucked his blanket right up to his beak and close around his wings and safely over his feet. and they plumped his pillow and asked the glowworms to turn down their glow. Then Sparky's auntie sat on the stool beside his bed and lilted a lullaby, letting it take flight in the small room and drift out into the darkness. She sang the song her mother had sung to her when she was a little owl too, the one about flying high to paint the stars and dance on the moon, and the one where they rode back to earth on a single moonbeam and then drifted on a lake on a lily leaf. And for the first time in a long time, Sparky didn't worry that he was missing out on anything. He didn't feel that he needed to keep moving and rushing from one place to the next. He didn't sit and imagine the size of the world and how much there was to see. As he lay in the bed, warm and cozy, he felt his wings relax at his sides. He listened to the sound of his breathing, slowing it down, so he drew in one long breath and held it for 1, 2, 3, and then slowly let out the breath, counting for 1, 2, 3. He felt the rise and fall of his chest, felt everything inside slowing down. He tried again, drawing in one long breath and holding it for 1, 2, 3, and slowly, ever so slowly, letting it out for 1, 2, 3. That is all it took for Sparky to fall asleep. He didn't see the smiles that went between his mother and his grandmother and his auntie. He didn't see because he was fast asleep, disappearing into a dream where he was somehow, in that magical way we can get places in dreams in a single moment, far away on the other side of the world. And he was seeing creatures he had never seen before. And there were flowers nodding up at him that he had never known. And the way the fields poured and rolled into the sea was so different to all he had seen. And the colour of the ocean was new. It was bluer and brighter and larger than he'd ever thought possible. Then he was on an island, and 1,000,000 stars glistened and glittered in the sky. And he was on the sand with his friends, with the animals of the day and the creatures of the night. And they were lying on their backs and gazing up at the sky and watching as moonbeams made words and wrote swirling stories in the darkness. And then, across the black of the night sky, a rainbow stretched from one side of the world to the other, and Sparky smiled in his sleep, mesmerized by how the impossible had become possible, because he had dared to disappear into a dream. The Sleepy Little Foxes by Alicia Ainsley. It was a cool night in Sleepy Forest. The sun had already set, and the moon was beaming brightly in the sky. The trees rustled with the motion of the wind as it passed through, and faintly, in the distance, you could hear the cooing of an owl. All of the woodland creatures were starting to wind down for the evening. The rabbits were burrowing down into their warm beds in the tunnels, and the birds were nestling up tight into their luxurious nests. The bears were cuddled up in their cozy caves, and the bees had fallen silent as they slept in their hives. The parents told pleasant stories to their children to whisk them off to sweet dreams, or sang them darling lullabies to ease them into their slumber. Some of the parents rocked their young to sleep, while others simply slept next to their babies. Meanwhile, one mother despaired over her children's inability to drift off. A mother fox sighed with exasperation as she watched her 2 young cubs tumble around and frolic in the grass together. She had been trying to coax them into their warm den for over an hour, but the defiant little foxes refused to listen. "Go to sleep, little foxes," she implored her 2 sons. But the rambunctious pair wouldn't listen. "We have too much energy," one of them declared as he leapt on top of his brother and playfully wrestled him to the ground. Oh dear, Mother Fox tutted, shaking her head from side to side. She was tired of trying to force her mischievous sons to go to sleep. She had too much to do. At night, the adult foxes would venture outside of their dens in search of food for the next day. If she didn't go out tonight, then they would all be very hungry the next day, and she would have to wait for nightfall yet again to go out. It was becoming increasingly difficult for her to do her job without keeping watch over her sons. Foxes are animals of the night, you see. They are nocturnal creatures, so they are accustomed to roaming around the forest when the sun sets and night comes. Foxes don't have the best eyesight, so they communicate with each other by sound and scent. That is why they are so perfectly built for living in the dark and enjoying the night time. They can find their way in the dark using simply their ears and their noses. When her sons were young, Mother Fox had no problem with getting them to sleep at night while she went out foraging. When they were babies, they needed as much sleep as possible, and they only woke up to eat and drink before drifting back off to sleep. But now that they were getting bigger, they were requiring more energy and were wanting to stay up later and later each night. She was finding it more and more of a struggle to get them to go to sleep than ever. The 2 little fox brothers were called Arlo and Louie. Arlo and Louie both had bright red fur with white chins and chests and black paws upon their feet. They had black button noses on the ends of their pointed snouts, and they had big triangular ears on the top of their tiny heads. Their red fur was so soft and fluffy that other animals in the forest often referred to them as little fluffy red clouds, although, now that they were getting older, their mother referred to them as little fluffy red storm clouds. They were becoming tougher to handle each day. Arlo and Louis continued to play with each other around the forest clearing, ignoring their mother. They jumped over logs and bounced off the sides of tree trunks. They ran through flower beds and pushed their way through bushes in their quest to chase one another. Their energy seemed to be endless, and Mother Fox didn't know what to do. Eventually, Mother Fox sighed and said to her disobedient sons, "Fine, you win. If you won't go to sleep, then so be it. I am going to go out and find us some food for tomorrow. If you two want to continue playing, then you can do so. But just make sure that you are back in the den by sunrise." Arlo and Louis jumped with glee. This was the first time that their mother was allowing them to stay up late to play, and they couldn't wait. They watched their mother trot off into the forest, leaving them behind to do as they pleased. "This is so exciting," expressed Arlo to his brother. "What shall we do with our first night of freedom?" Louis tilted his head and thought. He wiggled his button nose and twitched his whiskers, then suggested, "Well, we haven't been outside of our den before, so we need to explore the forest." "Good idea," Arlo replied, before adding, "I wonder what other animals we'll meet in the forest. There must be so many other creatures we can play with." The roguish foxes looked at each other with a sparkle in their eyes and grinned. They ran away from the grassy clearing outside their den and sped through the trees out into the night. They were in high spirits and enthusiastically ran further away from home and out into the forest. After about 10 minutes of mindless running, the little foxes came to a halt. They glanced around in confusion. Everywhere looked the same to them. In each direction they turned, all they could see were trees. Trees for miles, and bushes. They lifted their heads up to the sky, and all they could see were the branches and the leaves and the twinkling stars in the night sky, accompanied by the half moon. "I haven't seen anyone around," Arlo pouted disappointedly. Louis harumphed and sat his bottom down on the ground. "Me neither," he sighed. "Where is everybody?" All of a sudden, they heard a shushing sound. "Shh," came the voice. They looked around for where it had come from, but they couldn't see anything. "Did you hear that?" Louis whispered. "Hello, is anyone there?" Arlo called out into the forest. "Shh," came the sound again, but even louder this time. The brothers looked around, confused. They couldn't see anyone, but they couldn't have been imagining it. They tried calling out again to see if anyone responded, and they were delighted when they finally got a response. "Please, will you be quiet?" A hushed voice came from above. They lifted their heads back up to the sky and saw a pair of tiny eyes looking down at them from one of the tree branches. It was a bird. Arlo and Louie were very pleased to see the bird, but the feeling didn't appear to be mutual. The bird seemed a tad annoyed. "My children are trying to sleep, and you two are being very loud," the bird continued. "Shouldn't you be in your own beds by now?" Louis puffed out his fluffy chest proudly and responded, "We are too grown up for bedtime. Our mother said we are allowed to stay up all night." The bird furrowed its brow and shuffled its feathers. "Well, that might be so for you nocturnal foxes, but for the rest of us, we sleep at night," the bird retorted. "Please go to sleep, little foxes, and keep the noise down." On its final word, the bird hopped off along the tree branch and back towards its nest. Arlo and Louis shrugged their shoulders nonchalantly. They would just find somewhere else to go play if the bird didn't want them around. With a swish of their bushy tails, they raced off again through the trees. The deeper into the forest they got, the more interesting the wilderness became. There were larger, brighter flowers, dimmed in the darkness, and they came across a stream trickling through. They stopped to grab a drink of fresh water before wandering further up the bank. "Hey, Arlo, watch this," Louis giggled. As Arlo turned around to face Louis, he felt a splash of water land across his face. His fur was soaking wet, and when he opened his bewildered eyes again, he saw that his impish brother was stood in the shallow part of the stream. He had splashed him. Arlo sprang forward and used his paw to splash water in his brother's direction. The wave of water washed over Louis, and they both laughed elatedly. The playful duo splashed each other to and fro, soaking their fluffy hair through. This was an enthralling new activity that they hadn't discovered before. Playing in the stream was even more fun than playing in the grass. Just as they were both covered from head to toe in water, they heard a bark. They glanced over to the other side of the stream and saw a funny-looking creature that they hadn't seen before. A rotund rodent with short, spiky brown hair stood on the other side of the stream with its hands on its hips. It had 2 long buck teeth peeping out from its mouth and had a large flat tail behind it that tapped and padded impatiently against the muddy bank. "Excuse me," the odd creature hissed across the water. "What do you think you are doing? You are making an awful racket, and it's disturbing my children." Arlo and Louis looked sheepish and apologized. They didn't realize that anyone else was around. They were too caught up in their entertaining game to notice. "What are you?" Arlo queried innocently, not realizing how blunt his question was. The beaver folded its arms and fumed. "I, young fox, am a beaver. Hasn't your mother ever introduced you to one before?" Arlo shook his head bewilderedly and explained, No, she hasn't. This is our first night away from our den. The beaver raised its eyebrows and calmed down upon hearing this. In that case, I can understand why you might be confused, the beaver tutted. But let me teach you something, little foxes. The beaver informed Arlo and Louis that whilst they were animals of the night, most other creatures are not. When the sun sets, most animals go to sleep so that they can rest and wake up rejuvenated and ready for the next day when the sun rose. If they didn't get their much-needed sleep, then they would become cranky and impatient all day, beavers included. So, the beaver concluded, I suggest you go to sleep, little foxes, or move on and find somewhere else to play your childish games. Then the beaver span around and gave its tail one last hard thump against the ground before returning to its lodge and its family. We'd better go find somewhere else to play, Louis remarked. I don't fancy being scolded by a beaver again. Still dripping wet, the brothers climbed out of the stream and shook their bodies from side to side to dry off. Then they galloped off, further upstream. They were learning a lot about the forest and what it contained. On just their first night of freedom, they had met 2 new animals and learnt a bit about the way things were in the wilderness. They had discovered the joys of playing in water, and now they were purposefully looking for new ways to have fun in the forest. Eventually, they came across the entrance to a large cave. They couldn't see anything inside. It was pitch black. Hello, Arlo called out into the dark cave. He waited to see if anyone responded, but he heard nothing. I don't think anyone is in there, he reported, turning back to his brother. Louis stepped further into the cave and called out, Hello! As he did so, the sound of his voice reverberated around the cave walls, creating an echo. Hello, hello, hello. The sound of his voice repeated, fading out with each repetition. Arlo and Louis's eyes grew wide with wonder. Wow, they both chimed, and then heard their voices echo again. Wow, wow, wow. They turned to each other and cracked up. They fell about, laughing so hard that they held their stomachs. Their euphoric laughter echoed around the cave. This is amazing, Louis rejoiced, chuckling as the word amazing continued to bounce off the stone walls. Shall we go further inside? Arlo nodded his head eagerly, and they started to tiptoe further into the cave, but were stopped by a squeaky voice. I wouldn't recommend going in there if I were you, the meek voice recommended. A family of bears lived there, and I don't think they will be too impressed by your noisy shenanigans. Arlo and Louis paused. They knew what bears were, and They knew that they didn't want to get on the wrong side of a mother bear. They turned around swiftly and scampered back out of the cave. Once safely outside, they stopped by a tree to catch their breath. They noticed a blur of movement come from the mouth of the cave and fly through the air. They heard the fluttering of wings and looked up above them. Hanging from a branch, upside down, was another unusual creature. They had never seen anything like it before. The topsy-turvy creature spoke to them in the same small voice they had heard in the cave. "Phew! I'm glad we're out of there. I wouldn't want to be around when Mother Bear comes looking for who woke up her sleeping cubs," the creature chuckled. Arlo and Louie looked back at the cave and instinctively ran further away, as far as they could, until they could no longer see it. The capsized creature followed them and perched on another branch overhead. "Nobody else understands what it's like to be nocturnal," the small black creature sighed. "What are you?" Arlo asked curiously. "Why, I'm a bat, of course," it replied proudly, expanding its wings to the sides while still hanging head over heels from the tree. Arlo explained that they had never seen a bat before, or even heard of one. The bat was very kind and didn't judge them for their lack of knowledge. Instead, the bat was delighted to be able to teach them a thing or two. The bat added, "It's hard finding anyone to play with when you're nocturnal. Everyone else wants to sleep at night, and we have to be as quiet as possible so as not to wake them up. But all I really want to do is fly and play to my heart's content." Arlo and Louie smiled and offered kindly, "Why don't you play with us?" The bat looked ecstatic and let go of the tree branch to hover in the air. "I would love to do that," the bat replied. The three fun-loving animals spent the next hour playing around the forest. They tried to be as quiet as possible, to not disturb anyone else, and they chased one another round and round in circles. The bat flew through the air, soaring high and diving low, whilst the two little foxes dove under and bolted over objects on the ground. They had a rollicking good time all together. After a while, Arlo and Louie found themselves starting to get slower and slower. They had less energy and were finding it harder to keep up with the bat that flew so easily through the air. Their little legs were starting to ache, and their eyes were beginning to droop. Louie let out a little yawn, and Arlo followed suit. The bat flew lower to the ground and back to them. "Why aren't you keeping up?" the bat inquired inquisitively. Louie yawned yet again. "I'm tired," he answered. "Me too," piped up Arlo. The bat looked over the two young foxes and smiled. They looked absolutely worn out from all the fun they had been having. "Go to sleep, little foxes," the bat comforted them in a hushed voice. "I'll lead your way home." Arlo and Louis sleepily followed the bat through the trees and back to their den. They walked sluggishly slow and fought to stay awake to make it back to their mother. Upon sight of their den, Arlo and Louis picked up speed and trotted over to the entrance to their den, where their mother was waiting patiently. "Did you have a good night?" she questioned. But Arlo and Louis could hardly get a word out. They were so tired. Without saying a thing, they climbed down into the den and curled up in their warm bed. Mother Fox watched them and giggled fondly. They certainly looked like they had enjoyed their night, and she had a feeling that she wouldn't have to force them to go to sleep now. She was sure that within seconds they would be gently snoozing and snoring away in their comfy bed. Mother Fox turned back to the bat and thanked it for guiding her sons home and keeping watch over them. "It was my pleasure," the bat assured her. "They will sleep well now." Mother Fox laughed. "Oh, of that I'm very sure," she agreed. The bat flew off back out into the night sky, and Mother Fox crawled into the den. As she expected, Arlo and Louis were snuggled up close to each other, fast asleep. She watched their bellies rise and fall with their breath, and heard their sweet sighs of contentment. Nuzzling up close, she wrapped herself around her beloved sons protectively and closed her eyes. There were some battles she was willing to fight with her children, but not tonight. Tonight, they had learned their lesson all on their own and had a lovely experience along the way. As Mother Fox began to drift off to her own relaxing land of sleep, she looked forward to the night when she could go exploring with her little foxes in the future too. The Cow That Jumped Over the Moon by Jane Thomas. There's a lullaby I'm sure you've heard. I'll bet you know it, word for word. There's a cow, a cat, a dish, a moon. Do you think you know the tune? Say it with me as I go, if, of course, the words you know. Hey diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle, the cow jumped over the moon. The little dog laughed to see such sport, and the dish ran away with the spoon. The first time George heard this, he liked it. The second time he heard it, he was really very fond of it. And by the third time he heard it, he loved it. George is a great grey fluff ball of a cat who lives at the top of a very high tower in the busiest, boldest, brashest city of the world. And of all things, of all the creatures in the world who could have been his very best friend, his number one chum, his greatest pal, his bosom buddy, just so happens to be an owl called Barnaby. Barnaby will often fly to the top of the very high tower in order to spend the night chattering away with his friend George. And sometimes, on very special nights, when the moon is busy shining and everything is just as it should be in the world, the pair of them head off on an adventure. Each of these adventures always comes from a story George has heard from Oscar and Ollie. They're the two boys he lives with. And whenever they come home from school, George will go from room to room and listen to everything they learned that day. In this way, he has learned the times tables, even the really complicated 7 and 8 times tables, and all about the pyramids in Egypt, and that the Amazon River weaves its way through the jungles of South America. He has learned why the moon is sometimes there and sometimes isn't, and why he will only ever see a rainbow when it is somehow sunny and rainy both at the same time. Oh, and that the blue whale isn't a fish at all. It's a mammal, even though it lives in the ocean. And now, George has heard all about the cow that jumped over the moon and is delighted to discover that his friend Barnaby knows just the place to go to see him do it once more. They have to wait 2 long weeks before the time is just right, as Barnaby says that the cow will only perform the jump when the moon is full and bright. Each night, George sits in the window and watches until the moon rises in the sky. Each night, he can see it is a tiny little bit bigger than it was just the night before. And when it's full, when it is so big he can easily see the man on the moon looking back at him, George knows it is time to head to the top of the fire escape and wait for Barnaby to appear. When he does, George starts plodding his way down the fire escape, Barnaby floating gently by his side. Much as George wants to see the cow jumping over the moon, he also wants to feel the grass beneath his paws. He doesn't make the journey down the fire escape very often, after all. He crosses over to the park and lets the grass tickle him, and he walks up to a clump of lavender and in one quick move thrusts his head right into the middle of the bush. He takes a deep breath in, inhaling the glorious scent, and then backs out and rushes over to jasmine and does the same, and with roses and lilacs and honeysuckle. Sometimes Oscar and Ollie's mother will bring flowers home and put them in a vase on the table, and on those days George will leap onto the table and lie next to the vase, looking up at their beauty. The real thing, out here in the flower beds of the park, that's even better. Barnaby gives his friend some more moments with the flowers, and then beckons him over, guiding him towards a particular street lamp. Underneath the street lamp, looking as if he is waiting for them, is a very old man sitting on the front of a very old tuk-tuk, a bright orange carriage with 3 wheels. It has 2 seats in the back and 1 in the front for the driver. George had heard all about these tuk-tuks and how popular they were in India, but this would be his first time riding one. There is a rose-coloured canopy serving as a roof, and lights are wrapped all around the pillars and posts, so the tuk-tuk dances with light and colour. George and Barnaby climb into the back seat and settle down on the soft cushions, and the very old man, so old he looks as though he must have lived for 1,000 years, eases the orange carriage forwards. There is hardly anyone else on the roads at this time of night, and they push along the highway, the wind rustling George's grey fur. Barnaby wraps his wings around himself and curls up on a cushion in the corner, telling George he should really do the same. It's a long way they must travel to find the cow that jumps over the moon. But George, who spends so much time up in the rooms at the top of the highest tower of the busiest city of the world, can't help but look out at the world rushing by. The bright, flashing lights of the city and the noises that spill out of the doorways are soon replaced by the gentle glow of the street lamps in the suburbs. In one garden, George glimpses a bench and two people sitting on it, leaning back and looking up at the stars. And then, in a moment, the scene is whisked away and replaced by a cat walking slowly through a garden, looking for something around the base of the bushes. The cat sees George go rushing by, and for a moment George is convinced the other cat winks at him. And just in case it's true, he waves his paw. And then that scene is gone too, and the houses are set further and further back from the road. And then there are no houses at all, and they are in the countryside. There are hedgerows, lit from within by glowworms and fireflies, and George sees a pair of hedgehogs dancing in slow motion in what seems to be a huge chamber inside. Soft sounds of piano music spilling out from a place buried deep within a hedgerow. Then they are passing fields made bright by the white wool of the sheep, and George can see dozens and dozens of lambs who are dancing and playing by the light of the moon, as if it were the middle of the day and the sun still shone down on them. And then the hedgerows give way to walls of stone that have stood for hundreds and sometimes thousands of years, and still the tuk-tuk, driven by the man who looks to be more than 1,000 years old, races along, weaving this way and that as the road twists and turns. Barnaby still sleeps on his pillow, his wings wrapped around him and covering his face, and George, with nothing to see now that the walls are here, faces forwards and closes his eyes, feeling the wind rush against his fur. He's rocked to sleep by the motion of the tuk-tuk as it bounces gently up and down on the rises and falls of the road. George is woken by a gentle cough, and Barnaby is up on the handlebars of the tuk-tuk, waiting for his friend to draw himself out of his dream. Together, they walk up a path that winds its way through the woods, a strip of silver in the darkness that leads them over a little bridge and down through a tunnel, and across a meadow, and back into the thick tangle of trees and branches and trunks and stumps. Every now and then George sees a red toadstool with white spots, so he knows, in the way anyone does who's heard enough of the right stories, that this must be a magical land. Then, as they push their way through the darkness, leaves brushing softly against their faces, George begins to hear the sound of a violin playing a merry tune, and up ahead he can see a clearing in the trees. The violin becomes a little louder as they approach, and by the time they're in the clearing, surrounded by high trees that seemed to reach far, far into the sky, George realizes that the violin is there, in that clearing. And playing it is, of course, a cat. A cat fiddling the fiddle and rushing the bow back and forth across the strings of that violin, having music pour out into the night. Hey diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle, whispers George to himself. They stay for a while, sitting on a log to listen to the cat play his wonderful tunes. And as George's eyes adjust to the light, he sees that they're not alone. And in fact, all around them, the ground is moving with the dancing of animals, where mice link arms and swing themselves around, and foxes whirl hedgehogs from left to right. And George realizes his foot is tapping in time to the music, and he and Barnaby are swept up with it all and find that they too are linking a paw and a wing and swirling, twirling to the sound of the cat and the fiddle. And then Barnaby leads George towards another path. Again, a shining river of silver, lit bright in the forest. And as they go along, the trees fall back and they are there on a hilltop. Barnaby nudges George to look to the side, and there, at the base of the hill, stands a black and white cow. And suddenly she's running and running, and then she's leaping and heading high, high into the sky. George holds his breath as the cow sails higher and higher, and then there it is. The cow is leaping over the moon, and George whispers to himself, "Hey diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle, the cow jumped over the moon." And as he whispers this, a small dog, no larger than a cat, just a small dog who is all white with a dark patch over his right eye, comes to stand beside them. Once more, the cow is running and running, and then she's leaping and heading high, high into the sky. And once more, she is leaping over the moon, and the dog with the dark patch over his eye, sitting beside George and Barnaby, leans back his head and laughs aloud. Hey diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle, the cow jumped over the moon. The little dog laughed to see such sport, whispers George to himself. Then Barnaby is pulling George towards another path, and this one is lit by 1,000,000 fireflies. So it's a golden thread leading them through a meadow, and looking behind him, George realizes that the little dog with the dark patch over his right eye is following behind, and behind him is the cow who's jumped over the moon, and behind her is the cat with her fiddle, and a whole stream of animals still dancing and twirling and whirling to her music. And this strange little band, led by an owl and a fluffball grey cat, move their way slowly along the golden thread of path until they see a farmhouse up ahead. The farmhouse is lit from within, and there's music and laughter coming from inside, and the cat changes the music she's playing on her fiddle to match the music that's spilling out from the farmhouse. George climbs onto a bale of hay by the window and peers inside. His eyes opening wide as he sees chairs and tables dancing with candlesticks and jugs, and a clock has climbed down from its place on the mantelpiece and is dancing with a book that has leapt from a shelf. On the far side of the room, George then sees a dish whispering to a spoon, and the spoon seems to be giggling. And then they glance to see that nobody else is looking. Not expecting George to be peering in at the window, they don't look that way. And then they run off into the kitchen together. Hey diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle, the cow jumped over the moon. The little dog laughed to see such sport, and the dish ran away with the spoon. George whispers the poem to himself and sighs content. For everything is complete now. Barnaby has once more brought him to a magical place where the words of long-loved stories come alive. He turns to see everything again, watching the cat and the fiddle, stamping her paw in time to the music, tail swaying behind her. And the cow runs to the base of the hill, and then is rushing faster and faster. And then she is leaping higher and higher. And there she is, soaring once more over the moon. George is sure he sees the man on the moon laugh along with the little dog with the dark patch over his right eye, who is rolling on the floor, laughing as he watches the cow again and again leap high over the moon. And George takes a final look into the kitchen and sees the dish and the spoon in the corner by the pantry, whispering to each other. And then, with a quick glance, they're gone, running away together again. It is a very tired George who is led back through the woods by a very tired Barnaby. They follow the golden thread of path, the one lit by the fireflies, and then the silver thread of path lit by the light of the moon, and they cross over bridges and meadows and through tunnels and weave their way to the very edge of the woodland, leaving behind the cat and the fiddle, the cow and the dog, the dish and the spoon. The man who must be 1,000 years old is waiting for them in the orange tuk-tuk with the rose-coloured canvas on the roof and the lights that are wrapped around every pillar and post. And he helps George up onto the soft pile of cushions in the back. Barnaby arranges himself once more on the pillow, wrapping his wings about himself and covering his eyes as he nestles down to sleep as they head back to George's home. The moon is lower in the sky, a silver disk shrinking towards the ground. And on the other side of the world, there's a hint of purple-grey as the sun comes closer and closer to the horizon, ready to start a brand new day. George buries himself into a blanket on the seat in the back of the tuk-tuk and watches as the walls become hedgerows and the hedgerows become gardens and the gardens slowly fade away to be replaced by the buildings of the city. There is a boy on a bicycle with a basket on the front that's filled to overflowing with fresh bread. And George catches the scent of the bread on the air as they rush by. And there's a lady guiding a horse and cart through the town. The cart filled to overflowing with flowers, just like the ones Oscar and Ollie's mother sometimes brings home and puts in a vase. And the scent of those is with George for a moment, and then he's whisked along in his tuk-tuk. A lady comes by with a basket on her head, and George can see that it is filled with mangoes, and the mangoes are so sweet and ready for eating, and he can catch their scent in the air. Another boy rides another bicycle, and he has a huge bag around his shoulder, and George can see it is filled with rolled up newspapers, and he's throwing them into the shop doorways one by one as he goes. And George knows, for those rolled up newspapers appear in his home every day, just how the papers smell as they're opened and folded. He loves the evenings when Oscar and Ollie's father takes up the paper and finds pieces that he reads aloud to the family, because then George too can know what's going on in the outside world. He hears all about the events that are happening, and the shows and the competitions, and the excitement that goes on beyond the rooms in the very top of the tallest tower in the busiest city of the world. And then the tuk-tuk is back at the street lamp where Barnaby and George first found it. Only the sun has crept over the horizon now, and only a couple of stars remain in the purple of the early morning sky, and the street lamp has been turned off. The man, who must be 1,000 years old, turns and strokes George's soft fur and tickles him under his chin, and he winks at Barnaby as the two of them get off, and then the orange tuk-tuk with the rose-coloured canvas roof is gone, and it seems to George as if he was never there at all. Once again, George takes a moment to walk in the park and feel the soft green grass beneath his paws, and he buries his head in the lavender, the jasmine, the roses, the lilac and the honeysuckle. And once again, if you knew where to look, you would see the outline of a cat working its way slowly, so slowly, back up the metal stairs of the fire escape that is on one side of the huge tower, and beside him is the outline of an owl floating softly and silently through the air, guiding his friend home. At the top, George turns to Barnaby and thanks him for the night, and for finding them the tuk-tuk and taking them far, far away from the city to the wonderful world where the creatures of the long-loved stories live. And Barnaby assures him that any time Any time he hears such a story, George must tell him, and Barnaby will take him to the place where the story started, for he knows them all so well. And once more, just before he heads inside to curl up on the end of Oscar's bed, or maybe Ollie's, George turns to Barnaby and says aloud the lines of the poem he knows so well, and that this night has been brought to life. There's a lullaby I'm sure you've heard. I'll bet you know it, word for word. There's a cow, a cat, a dish, and a moon. Do you think you know the tune? Say it with me as I go, if, of course, the words you know. Hey diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle, the cow jumped over the moon. The little dog laughed to see such sport, and the dish ran away with the spoon. Now we're drifting gently from the waking world into the world of dreams. Our body is soft and heavy. Our arms are heavy and our legs are heavy too. Our breathing is gentle and relaxed. Our breath going in through our noses and down into our chests. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Just like the waves lapping back and forth, carrying you gently into sleep. In the waking world, our bodies are busy and active, but as we pass into the world of dreams, our bodies can relax. Let your bodies relax now. Let your eyes relax. Let your fingers relax. Let your toes relax. Feel all the muscles of your body sink down further into your warm and cozy duvet. Feel your body rest heavily down on the firm comfort of your bed. Now feel as your body relaxes how your mind is released. Feel just how free your mind is. The world of dreams is like a playground for your mind. There are swings and roundabouts and slides where your mind can play. In the world of dreams, your mind gets bigger and bigger and fills your sleep with all kinds of joys and wonders and magical stories. And here is something that not many people know, but it's a secret I'm going to tell you. But you're the only one I'm going to tell. When we go to sleep and pass into the world of dreams, we are accompanied by the kindly spirits who live in the dream world. They live on the moon, and when nighttime comes, they float down softly as silk to meet each person who is drifting into sleep. The dream spirits are waiting there for your mind to arrive, and when you get there, they take your hand in theirs and squeeze it gently and guide you through the world of dreams. Isn't that wonderful? To have a guide who can keep you company even as you sleepwalk through the world of dreams. They take you by the hand, they give you a friendly squeeze, they guide you into sleep. The spirits of the dream world ask you, what would you like to dream about tonight? And because your dreams are your very own playground, where you can build and create anything your imagination desires, you can answer however you like. Maybe tonight in your dreams you would like to climb a tree, sit in the canopy, surrounded by tinkling leaves and bathed in dappled moonlight, and listen to the nightingale sing, or the crickets chirrup from the forest floor below. Or perhaps you would like the dream spirits to guide you into a magical world, where you can learn how to perform all kinds of wondrous spells and charms. You can go on adventures, flying through the air on your broomstick. The white clouds spread out below you like an ocean of fluffy marshmallows. Or maybe you'd like to visit a magical zoo, full of rabbits and puppies and kittens whose fur is so soft and comes in all kinds of different colours, brown and white and black, but also purple and green and blue. In this zoo you can find all kinds of animals that you can't find in the waking world. Animals people in the waking world say couldn't possibly exist. But they do. They do exist. And do you know why? Because your mind is so powerful and rich and magical that in the world of dreams, anything is possible. Your imagination is an enchanted place. It can create whole worlds out of thin air, out of nothing. Anything your heart desires can be found in the world of dreams. So let your eyelids be heavy. Let your body sink into the warmth of your duvet. Let your body drift into a deep and peaceful sleep. And let your mind float away into the world of dreams. The dream spirits are waiting to guide you through their magical world, their world of wonder, their world of delight. See the soft smiles on their beaming faces. Feel the warmth of their hands in yours. They take you by the hand. They give you a friendly squeeze. They guide you into sleep. Walk with them and let them lead you on magical adventures into the world of dreams. The jungles of green leaves with all kinds of creatures ready to show you their lives. To castles built out of clouds to rivers bright as rainbows for you to swim down, to crackling campfires next to lakes where the pitter-patter sound of rain sounds like the gentle tinkling of music. Remember to thank your dream spirits for guiding you lovingly through the land of dreams. Say, thank you, dream spirits. And when you say, thank you, dream spirits, the dream spirits will say, thank you back. Because the dream spirits are just as lucky to accompany you through your magical dream world as you are that the spirits are there to guide you. So let your eyes close, let the lids fall heavy. Let every part of your body, from the top of your head to the tips of your fingers and toes, be warm and heavy and sleepy. Let your mind slip into the peaceful world of sleep, where anything is possible. Good night.